Zimbabwe is a failed state. Why some people, some Zimbabweans continue to pretend otherwise beggars belief. This point we should not be arguing about. The evidence is there. The Zimbabwe economy is in total meltdown. Zimbabwe has become a laughingstock. It has become the textbook case of a failed state. Unbelievable. Here is a country that in 1980, the late Julius Nyerere said to Mugabe, "You have got the jewel of Africa." And he was right. The country had a really robust economy. It has got incredible resources. The potential is unbelievable. Zimbabwe was producing enough food to feed its own people. But since the turn of the century, when Robert Mugabe seized the farms, mostly white-owned farms, to give them to his cronies, the country has struggled to feed its own people. Every 2 or 3 years, the country has had to rely on food aid. It couldn't even pay for it because by destroying the agricultural sector, the regime destroyed the economy as well. We have been blundering from pillar to post. That is a reality. The last 23 years, the people of Zimbabwe have risked life and limb to elect the opposition for the primary purpose that they would implement the democratic reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. And yet last year, Zanu PF blatantly rigged the elections again. Because not even a token reform has been implemented to stop the rigging. Worse still, the opposition participated in those elections, knowing fully well that they were flawed. Knowing fully well that by participating, they'll be giving Zanu PF legitimacy. And yet they participated. I find it tedious that there are some Zimbabweans there who still refuse to accept that the MDC CCC has been playing a game with the people of Zimbabwe. They pretend to be a genuine opposition, when in reality, they are nothing more than the Zanu PF Team B. They've been playing to make sure that Team A wins no matter what. That's number one. Number two, they've been participating to make sure that Team A, even after it has rigged the elections, gets legitimacy. The things that MDC have been doing, particularly since the GNU, points to that. You cannot deny that MDC have been playing to deceive the people of Zimbabwe. We can go and enumerate all the instances where he's saying, what was going on here? The fact that MDC have failed to implement even one token reform in 23 years, including the 5 in the GNU, makes you wonder, is MDC these MDC guys genuinely opposition, or they are pretending to be opposition? Why have they failed to implement even one token reform? At the end of the GNU, SADC tried to talk them and say, no, you cannot go into the next election, 2023, without first implementing the reforms. Because if you do, Zanu PF will win them. And guess what? Morgan Tsvangirai and company ignored the advice. They went into the elections. What did you expect SADC to do under those conditions? They'd accept. Of course, Zanu PF blatantly rigged the elections. And SADC had to give them political legitimacy. I'd like to play this video again, depicting the talking about the elections into 2018. Again, in this video, the most important thing to note there is the very fact that we are looking at an election process in which MDC's role is questionable, to say the least. Let's listen to it again.
Zimbabwe have now held their recent elections, which went well.
International monitors had to force their way through angry crowds to deliver their verdict. They reported serious flaws in the process. It was not a level playing field. Many injured and 3 dead. The opposition says the shootings and the beatings cannot be justified. And an election in which Zimbabwe dared to dream has instead brought back its worst nightmares. There were running battles through the city centre, and the streets echoed to the sound of gunfire.
Zimbabwe have now held their recent elections, which went well.
You are ready now to start.
I just want to pause there for a minute. The European Union had a really big team of election observers in 2018. And they came up with a detailed report stating what went wrong with those elections, and came up with 23 recommendations to ensure that we do not have a repeat of the rigged elections. Guess what? Come 2023, not even one token reform had been implemented. And not only that, the opposition, our friends, Chamisa and company, were the ones who insisted in participating in the 2023 elections without even one reform having been implemented. Why? You can't keep on complaining that Zanu PF is rigging the elections. And here is the opportunity for you. Let's get these reforms implemented. And you ignore the reforms completely. You insist in participating in the elections without even one meaningful reform. Why? That year, 2018, it was none other than Chamisa himself who was claiming that he has got stringent measures to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. When people were asking, why are we going again into another election without reforms? No, we have got stringent measures to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. Of course, he was lying. But why was he deliberately lying? Come back to my original argument. MDC CCC are nothing more than Zanu PF Team B. They are not playing to win. They're playing to make sure that Team A wins, and it has got legitimacy. But let's go back to the 2018 election and this video and the report that we are following.
I am ready. You may start. Thank you, my lord. What ZEC has done is to violate the constitution, to violate the electoral act in a manner which has ultimately benefited the first respondent. Mashonaland Central, page 159, the report by the ZBC, it does two things. Number one, it mentions figures. Number two, it attributes those figures to a ZEC official. It says by 5:30 p.m., 105,000 people had voted in Mashonaland Central. The final figure that one gets from ZEC is that an hour and 30 minutes later, plus 370,000 people voted. Is it humanly possible? But it doesn't end there. Then there is the issue of identical polling results. There are at least 16 polling stations with identical results. Identical results for Chamisa, identical results for Mnangagwa, identical spoiled votes. And in all those places, Mnangagwa not only wins, but wins big. It's like a kid was playing with the figures. That, with respect, is not how an election is conducted. We'll now give the opportunity to Mr. Kanengoni.
The Zimbabwe Electoral Commission cannot be taken to task to say, why is the voter turnout in my central at this particular level and not at that particular level? Voters behave the way they do. No one knows why. Maybe behavioral scientists may be able to answer the question if they study it.
Mr. Kanengoni, there's the averment that several polling stations showed identical results.
And the simple point we make is that there's no need to be theoretical about it. We have the returns. This is something that happened. We show you the returns. And we've put the returns for two of those polling stations here to illustrate the point.
You say it happened?
Yes.
But in his presentation, Bofu says it's actually 16 polling stations where the identical results. You heard it?
Yes, we did. Even in the affidavit, they put a bit more of the polling stations there. But we chose this to illustrate to the court. But for the rest, it did happen.
I'd like to stop it there. We really should not be looking for behavioral scientists here to tell us what has happened here. You cannot have 16 polling stations with identical results. Identical. The same number of people who voted for Mnangagwa in one station, in polling station A, voted in polling station B. The same for Chamisa. The same number in A as in B. The same for all the other candidates. The same for the number of spoiled votes. The same total of the number of spoiled votes. And you go to the next one. Polling station C, the same number for Mnangagwa. Polling station D, the same. Chamisa, C, D, the same. Spoiled votes, exactly the same. The same number of total votes cast, exactly the same. 16 polling stations in which 2 polling stations showed exactly the same figures. This has nothing to do with behavioral scientists, as the learned friend here, Kanenkon, is trying to tell us. This doesn't make any sense. This absolutely does not make any sense. I think the normal person with any, you don't have to be a lawyer or a scientist to realize this could only mean that certain polling stations were picked and their votes were counted twice. There was no polling station A and B with identical figures. It was polling station A. The figures for that polling station was entered. And the common feature in all those 16 polling stations is that Mnangagwa was leading comfortably. And so that polling station's figures total was entered again. And another one, where Mnangagwa was leading, was repeated as well. This was a case of duplicating the number of votes for Mnangagwa. Let's just continue with this video and hear what the judge had to say on this matter.
It did actually occur.
We'll now go back to the applicant. Why go for speculative conclusions of manipulation?
The point that I wish to make.
I think it is important, that point that the judge is making. He is coming out with the common sense. Why are you speculating? The law is very clear. At the end of the vote counting and the results of each polling station being declared, all the material relating to that polling station must be put in the ballot box and it must be sealed. And all the respective players who have been involved in that polling station would witness the sealing of that box. The position here was very clear. Those 16 polling stations, 8 of the polling stations must have been real. The other 8 did not exist. It's just that the entry of those results of those 8 were repeated. So the logical, rational thing to do here is what the judge is suggesting. Why don't we open the ballot boxes of those 8, of those 16? Unless they'd created another additional non-existent boxes, ballot boxes, we will find there are only 8. The other 8 are missing because they're not there, they're duplicate. So the rational thing to have asked for here is let's go back to open and have all those 16 polling station boxes opened. And here is Chamisa's lawyer giving a counter argument why he did not want to have those ballot boxes opened.
Is that this is evidence of manipulation by ZEC after the process. Now, if you go to what they call the primary data, you're going to see manipulated data. So the applicant cannot ask a court to open residue, which has already been manipulated. If you go to the residue, you will drink from a poisoned well.
That is the most irrational argument I've ever heard. We have already established here that they could not have possibly be. The individual is the one who argued that point. It doesn't make any sense. How can you have 16 polling stations with identical results, identical in every respect? That's nothing to do with behavioral science, as Kanengoni was trying to argue at one point. The only rational conclusion here was that there were not 16 polling stations with identical results. There were 8 polling stations with their results. When it comes to adding the figures, those polling station results were entered twice. They were duplicated. The only way you can establish that to be a fact is to go back to those 16 polling stations. Let's have a look at those polling stations. Let's have a look at the sealed ballot boxes of those 16 polling stations. And for somebody to be saying, no, we don't want to open them, it beggars belief. So in this case here, it's clear. It was not the constitutional judge, the court that refused to have those ballot boxes opened, including the 8 imaginary ones, but Chamisa's own lawyers. It wasn't ZEC who said, no, we don't want to have those ballot boxes opened. It was Chamisa's own lawyers who did not want to drink from the poisoned well, who did not want to open the imaginary boxes. How do you know that they're imaginary unless you ask for them? You want to speculate that they are imaginary boxes. And here is your chance to establish whether it is an effect or not. And you are the one who is refusing to do so. That's unbelievable. He was arguing that it's like a kid is playing with the figures. I think it is Chamisa and company who are playing with the people of Zimbabwe. Deliberately pretending that this is a serious contest when they know that they are not serious. They have no intention of winning the elections at all, or making sure that the elections are free, fair, and credible, and that the people of Zimbabwe are given a meaningful say in the governance of the country. They want to pretend that this is a contest when it's not. MDC, CCC have been pretending that they wanted reforms, that they want free, fair, and credible elections, when in reality, they did not. That is the truth. They've just been deceiving the people of Zimbabwe. Go through the motions of a court challenge. And on all the critical matters, it's not the judge or ZEC that throws the spanner in the works, but Chamisa himself. Chamisa and company himself are the one who are throwing the spanner in the works. because they don't want the truth to be known. That they are only playing a game, they are playing along to pretend that this is a contest when it's not.
When you look at the figures, let's look at those that have been admitted by ZEC. Let's look at the parliamentary tally. When we show that 40,000 people are said to have voted in the presidential election and not in the primary election, and ZEC does not have returns which show that there were people who simply chose to vote in the presidential election, that is the end. Fortunately, they took away my phone. I wanted to just do a quick calculation, but it is, let me just do a quick calculation. It's around 69,000 votes, which have nothing to do with the rest. So my lords, my ladies, on the figures that are purely arithmetic, we have 69,000 under circumstances where we require 31,000 to establish that first.
I think those are an argument that could be, personally, I think we can ignore it. Why go for an even more speculative case when you have got a more substantive case? In this particular case, the substantive argument being that we have got results of 8 polling stations, real polling stations, that have been entered twice, because they could not possibly come up with 8 fictitious polling stations and also come up with the ballot boxes for them. If they were to do that, then they would have to also produce fictitious people who supervise those polling stations. I think history will show those 16 polling stations, half of them were fictitious. In fact, if somebody was to carry out a more thorough investigation in this, it has since expired that MDC Alliance did not have election agencies at all the polling stations. And it would not be surprising at all that all of these 16 polling stations were some of those polling stations where MDC Alliance did not have polling agencies. Why? Nobody knows. Of course, it was deliberate. Chamisa himself claimed that they had polling station agencies at all polling stations. Why are you lying? Who are you trying to protect here? It was not until 2022 that Chamisa finally admitted that they did have enough polling station agencies. But this one here, even if they did not have polling station agencies, this one was a case where you're saying you can't imagine how it can possibly be that 16 polling stations would have identical results in every regard. And these are real. It would have been one of those cases where you're saying, there is your case. We have got a result here that is based on fictitious polling stations. We want to see those polling stations. We want to see the sealed ballot boxes of those polling stations. Why would you go for a speculative result? But that is exactly what happened here. I think we are being naive. If it had been the judge who had refused to have those sealed ballot boxes opened, one would say, yes, we've got a clear case here of the judiciary being corrupt. I'm not saying the judiciary is not corrupt. I think there's also a mountain of evidence to show that. But here is a situation where we've got a clear case that the opposition is corrupt. The opposition is playing a game with the people of Zimbabwe. The opposition is playing to deceive the people of Zimbabwe. We are in a serious political situation in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is a failed state. We could have changed if the opposition had faithfully implemented the democratic reforms. I believe Zimbabwe would be in a different place right now. It's not, because the opposition deliberately have been playing a game of deception, deliberately misleading the people of Zimbabwe, making them believe they are in playing for Zanu PF when in reality they're not, playing for on the side of the people when in reality they are not. And as long as we allow this to continue, we are not getting out of this mess. What the people of Zimbabwe need is an opposition that will implement the democratic reforms and stop Zanu PF rigging elections. We need free, fair, and credible elections. That is the only way we can be certain of having an accountable government. If they fail to perform, people can remove them from office. At the present moment, we are stuck with Zanu PF. They have been rigging elections the last 43 years. In the last 23 years, they've been rigging elections with the help of the opposition, who pretend that they're implementing reforms when in reality they are not. I can understand the ordinary people, particularly in the rural areas, who have got difficulty in understanding the double dealing by the opposition. But I refuse to understand why the so-called intellectuals are failing to see the double dealing here. It is not rocket science. You do not have 23 years, including 5 in the GNU, and you fail to implement even one token reform, and you still pretend that you are genuinely interested in free, fair, and credible elections? Of course not. It is the American writer, Mark Twain, who said no amount of evidence will ever persuade an idiot. I think there is a mountain of evidence there to convince anyone who is genuinely looking at this issue of why Zimbabwe is in the mess we are in, that the opposition, the MDC, CCC, have been conniving with Zanu PF to keep Zanu PF in power, and have a share of the spoils of power. There is a mountain of evidence. And I am disappointed that the so-called intellectuals are playing along and pretending that they don't see it. Many of them, of course, is because they are hoping that they will join the opposition and get their share of the spoils of power, particularly those in senior opposition positions right now. They can see the conniving, but as long as they get their share of the spoils of power, they don't care. This is the ordinary people who are paying the price. I don't know how long we are going to allow this madness to continue. It is madness. Zimbabwe is in a serious economic and political situation. Millions are living in abject poverty. And yet the country has got so much potential. And the idiots that Mark Twain is talking about here are the intellectuals, those who deliberately choose to close their eyes and their minds and refuse to see the reality on the ground. One of the most shocking things about Zimbabwe politics is that the opposition, actually, their support base is the intellectuals, those in the urban centers who are not subjected to the same political machinations that the rural people are subjected to, who should be able to think for themselves. Those are the support base of the opposition. The opposition, the same opposition we're talking about here, who have been deliberately playing the double game or pretending they want free, fair, and credible elections when in reality they don't care about it. Be rest assured, Nelson Chamisa and company will be participating in the 2028 elections without even one token reform implemented, because they don't care about free, fair, and credible elections. All they care about is that they participate, gives Zanu PF legitimacy, and they get a share of the spoils of power. How long are we going to allow this madness to continue? That is the question that people must ask themselves out there. At least history will record what has been really happening these last 23 years. I don't think we can deceive history as well. That tape I just played there, you do not have to be a lawyer to realize that this is something that is so unbelievable. This is just unbelievable. You go into a case with the intention of losing it. And I think MDC went in that courtroom meaning to lose that court challenge. They did not want to win it. They would have never participated in those elections if they really were serious about the elections being free, fair, and credible. Why would you participate in an election where there isn't even a meaningful vote, a verified voters roll? There is a mountain of evidence showing that MDC has been conniving with Zanu PF. And I'm just disappointed at some of the Zimbabweans out there who still want to pretend that we have got a genuine opposition in Zimbabwe when we don't. MDC/CCC are nothing but Zanu PF Team B. They've been playing for Team A to win and playing to make sure that Team A gets political legitimacy. That is the truth. Thank you very much for listening, and good night.